All right, dear partners and colleagues, let's continue our late afternoon program. And thank you for those of you who bothered to return back from the coffee break. We did lose a couple of people during the coffee break, but let's agree, let's commit together to make them regret that they left. So let's make this really an interactive and useful and good panel. I know we can do it together. I certainly know it from my colleagues, the special guest stars from Finland, and of course our distinguished guests from abroad. That there's a lot of kind of knowledge to be shared with each other and with you. So let me briefly introduce you, our panelists this afternoon. In addition to our distinguished guests, Dr. Ramasami and Dr. Yu, we have here with us my old colleague from Nokia, Dr. Erkki Ormala, Vice President of Technology Policy, was that correct? And then we have Petri Peltonen from Finland's Trade Ministry, and your title was Director General. That's correct, Director General. And then last, but certainly not least, Professor Raimo Väyrynen, Director of Finnish Institute of Foreign Affairs, and a well-known panelist and researcher and research politician in Finland. So let us get started with today's panel with this group, and we have practically two main themes for our discussion this afternoon. We will start by deepening the insights what we heard from the keynote presentations this earlier today, by continuing that dialogue that we started before coffee break with commentaries from all of the participants here in the panel, and also commentaries from you. And after that, we will move on discussing about the kind of the policy implications. What do the learnings gathered today mean for Finland and Europe, and what should we do differently? What are the policy recommendations? And that's the second part of the discussion, and hopefully you can also join with some good commentaries and recommendations what could be done better and more. But without further delay, let's get started, and I would like to ask our foreign guests to start by commenting briefly what you found most interesting in your colleagues' presentations. Did you find some common themes across these very different presentations? They were very different, as you could clearly kind of see, both in style and content. But still, I believe that some common themes can be found. So first reflections from you. Would you like to start, Dr. Ramasami?
Sure. I think the connecting link is all three presentations raise the importance of the human component, the capacity building or human capital. We articulated in different styles in different languages. Of course, one was Japanese, other is Tamil, but Chinese, but they are meant the same. We also, however, raised in some sense that the public-private partnership model is an essential component of the technocratic approaches to building innovations. I think that's common to both. I would say all three.
Yes, thank you. And Dr. Yu?
Sure. I think I've learned a lot from my fellow speakers. Of course, there are different concepts, different understandings about innovation. Each nation and its people will have a different understanding as how to really fulfill the goals and under the name of innovation. And I think the common sense is science technology are the major components. Of course, there's a strategic issues how to spend money wisely and on the money on the goals. And also the other one is the difference, sort of diversified landscape, sort of shaped by different culture. And if you think about the model of economy growth and sort of the history among three different nations, I think they're quite different. And Japan, of course, is a well-developed country. And India and China are very similar. And if you look at the growth, the potential is very similar. And I think people in the world expect very similar growth in the next 20 or 30 years. And of course, there will be competition, there will be a collaboration, and there will be passion to really build this two increasingly the world most populous country. I think India will have more people, will become the number one in year 2025. I think as predicted. I think these two nations will share a lot of similarities in the years to come. I think that's their common shared characteristics and also differences, I think, from the talks I've learned.
Yeah, probably from the demographic point of view, India's window of opportunity is probably still longer. I mean, I didn't see the kind of demographic kind of chart, but I understand that the kind of average age in India is, what, under 30?
29.8.
Okay.
Yeah,
it's a young generation, so the window of opportunity will last longer. Would you care to comment also a little bit of the kind of different, your challenges are similar and the ambitions are also similar, but then the kind of the approaches. Dr. Ramasami, you kind of emphasized quite a lot of this kind of grassroots innovation and diversity. Then again, in your presentation, Dr. There was more kind of a kind of comprehensive target setting from top. So there was a top-down versus bottom-up kind of philosophy that probably kind of characterizes the innovation systems. Is this oversimplifying it or not?
Well, if you ask me, I talked about both.
Yeah.
I talked about dualism, where the New Millennium Initiative talked about is top-down.
Yeah.
And I talked about another model of bottom-up.
Yeah.
I'm a shoemaker. One size doesn't fit all. So I think we require different sizes.
Yeah, that was very clearly came up in your presentation, the pluralism.
In China, I think it's a sort of communist slash capitalist nation. I think China has one party, so control the country. I think there's elements that the government will probably pull the acts together faster, as the rest of the world know. For example, like during the SARS crisis, that the government can act really fast, and that's the advantage. And I think the government also think about political reforms to promote different sort of not the competing parties, but the parties that are sort of independent and can actually provide different voices. I think there's a certain elements of democracy in the future, especially when you want to build a innovative nation. And I think political reform will be one of the major elements. I think in terms of priority, economic reform, healthcare reform will come first, but the political reform has to be there. But it may not be 20 years, in a 20 years window, maybe a little longer. And I've actually educated in the Western world and come back to China and talk to people about democracy, especially describing what actually happened in the U.S. and other European countries. And most of the people, they they receive in a very negative way. They think, it's impossible. We are so poor, and we cannot afford to lose this opportunity. Let's forget about elect new president and a new party. Let's get rich first. I think that's the main attitude. I think in the past, the Chinese people worry about food, feeding the people, but now they are sort of have money in hands, and that now they are thinking about innovation. I think it's the right time, and also they believe the window of opportunity is quite short. They have to pull all the act together, not creating a chaotic situation like in the past, the famous Cultural Revolution, and people believe, especially like my generation, we actually suffered the time that we wasted lots of time. And I myself went to the countryside for 5 years, and it's the time that precisely for a PhD degree.
Mm-hmm. But certainly one additional common characteristic between China and India is the passion that there is in people in wanting to succeed. And that's something that also Dr. Kurokawa from Japan was kind of calling after in Japan, and probably, it applies to the other Western countries as well. And so the passion is an important fuel for innovation, and you both have it in your country. It's a good starting point. Well, let's move on now to our Finnish colleagues and ask you to reflect what you heard today. Why don't you, Erkki, start as the next one in the row?
Yeah, thank you. Very briefly, I think that the presentations were extremely illustrative in the sense that the times are over when we in the West were able to set the agenda. It is not the question that we will sort of have the intellectual leadership anymore. These countries, India, China, Japan, they are gaining. They are sort of taking measures which to a certain extent look from our perspective even harsh in order to achieve what they have set as a target, to gain leadership in innovation and R&D. And I think this is a very, very important change. It is a sort of a change that is challenging our way of thinking in Europe, in Finland, that we have to take into account that there are new players coming into the play. And ultimately, from our perspective, I think we should see this as an opportunity. There is a great opportunity if we can play our cards correctly. If we understand better what's going on, what's happening in India, China and Japan, so we will have all the possibilities of being, once again, the beneficiary of this transition. But this is perhaps the topic of the second part of our session. Yes. But one observation of this, I also recognize this human capital as a common denominator of the discussion, and public-private partnership. But one thing that was to a certain extent missing from these presentations was, if we think the innovation and the innovation systems, we have to look at the human capital, we have to look at the R&D, we have to look at the systemic nature of the system. But we also have to look at the market conditions. And that was not reflected very strongly in the presentations. And we know very clearly that some problems that Japan was facing in the beginning of the 90s, but was very much related to the market conditions. They pretended that it's enough to be competitive globally and neglected the competitiveness internally. And that is perhaps the lesson that we all should learn, that there is just one play yard, which is the global economy, and if you're not competitive in the global economy, you are not capable of being competitive in the national environment either.
So you're in fact a little bit kind of what you said about Japan was not fully in line with what Dr. Kurokawa was saying. He was kind of more emphasizing that Japan was too long kind of benefiting and enjoying the benefits of a large home market before it really started to look globally. your perspective was that, in fact, I mean, when starting to look for business opportunities globally, they forget that the very competitive home market, which was also important. So it's not either or. You have to be. That's your point. You have to be competitive in both.
I remember OECD statistics from 1989, which listed the OECD countries according to the productivity. And Japan was number 1 in terms of productivity in the export sector. But it was the last OECD country in terms of the productivity at the national GDP.
Very convincing point.
Yeah.
Petri, would you like to continue?
Yes, thank you. Well, after these 3 insightful keynote speeches and what Erkki has put forward, it's certainly very easy to concur with those conclusions. Maybe to extend the discussion a bit, something that sort of caught my ear was this sort of the notion of innovation. It's now the famous buzzword, and I think it was Dr. Ramasami who mentioned that indeed innovation is not an end itself. It's a tool to achieve higher level objectives, be those economic growth, be that well-being, be that renewal. So I think innovation today means basically reform and renewal, and that again is a subject of almost all policy areas. And I think this sort of a convergence of policies is something which is happening. First of all, within science, technology and innovation, I mean, those for sure cannot be seen as separate silo policies. They have to be developed together in total fashion. And I think Finland in this respect has been reasonably successful, being able to sort of build synergies between science, technology and innovation policies, at least until now. I think the second challenge that we are facing now is that even though we are able to sort of synchronize the 3, science, technology and innovation, in a reasonably well-working fashion, innovation has to be now geared to the economic policy, to the social policies and many other sectoral policies. And I think that is another major challenge that we are facing here in Finland. But again, I certainly concur with Dr. Ramasami that innovation is not an end itself. Something also that sort of caught my eye when I was listening to the presentations, and we're having 4 countries now actually under review. We have Japan, China, India and Finland. And I think the first sort of a thought that came to my mind is basically a bit positive thinking that incidentally those 4 countries account for almost 50% of the global R&D. So that sounds reasonably good. Of course, we recognize the fact that Finland happens to be about 1% of that 50%. So that's another sort of a fact as well. But we shouldn't be too depressed about these comparisons between nations. I mean, China or India or Japan, or at least the first 2 ones, China and India, are not uniform nations. I think the global competition today is not between nations, it's between corporations, it's between areas, regions, universities, even individuals. So I think in this respect, the conventional thinking of having national policies and developing one single national policy doesn't really bear or carry that well to the futures. And I think in this respect, again, we have sort of also a positive opportunity for Finland. Though we are the 1% of global R&D, we could be if we are able to position this right at 1% in a smart way, we could really make a global significance and sort of find our green branch in this sort of a global innovation ecosystem.
Yeah. Let me pick up on that, because I think there was a very important point also for the next discussion on the policy implications. But as we know, kind of Thomas Friedman's book, I mean, Flat World, I mean, we know that the world is becoming more flat, but at the same time, isn't the world becoming also more spiky, as Richard Florida says, and which means that there is kind of a more and more kind of innovation centers, and the innovation in the world happens in very few places, in fact. Now, I would probably kind of like to turn back to our kind of foreign guests and to reflect this question that how do you see your countries from this perspective? Is it where do you have innovation? Is this kind of spiky a good characterization of your countries, that innovation happens in a few places, particularly not everywhere evenly?
Okay.
I think in China, the situation is very clear. There's a pockets of excellence and few fields of really that there's something happening, like automobile industry. There's a new companies actually making good cars and selling outside China. But overall, and there are more sort of automobile making companies that actually from joint ventures. So I think the road is quite bumpy ahead, but that may not be a real obstacles. I think people actually join force, and there is no boundary among different nations. If there are something that all the parties can benefit from, then that particular field or particular thing will actually be a reality, and everyone can contribute, and the advancement will actually develop in a particular field. I think that's probably the future. There's in terms of science, there's no boundary. Even I'm a U.S. citizen, but I'm working in China probably for the rest of my life. If there are opportunities for me to do my research and to help China, and also I'm actually collaborating with professors all over the world.
Yeah. But it's individuals collaborating all over the world, and what about India?
See, if India turns uniform standard, the world will get confused. So we have our brand equity is diversity. So we can't have uniform lines anywhere. The way our innovation infrastructure would emerge. I use the word emerge because as Secretary of Science and Technology, I only assist. I don't think I decide. There will be an emergence. In this emergence, we have collateral participation of individuals, groups, institutions, agencies on a much wider platform. I don't think if the world becomes flat, it'll be interesting. It should have Himalayas, it should have Ganges, it should have everything. So given that parameter, I think we have to strategize relationships, not so much for competing with somebody else, but together we bring a certain value that we individually cannot bring to each other. And that, I think, is the nature of this country's DNA, so will prevail.
Okay.
On a longer term.
So let's come back to this collaboration issue a bit later, but and move on still with the first round, and Raimo Väyrynen.
Okay, thank you. Let me first echo what my colleagues Erkki and Petri said about the importance of hearing the Asian perspectives, both the variety of those perspectives and the depth of those perspectives. It's indeed true that there is no European, and even less a Finnish monopoly on science and technology policy. To the contrary, one might say. But let me pick on what Petri said about this 50% rule and have a little bit different take on it. When listening to our Asian guests this afternoon, I worked out a simple arithmetical equation. It's a very simple one, that science and technology capability equals to the size times intensity of investment times quality. So it's a multiplication game, not a summing up those factors. And in practical terms, it means that you multiply the size of gross domestic product with the share of R&D of the gross domestic product plus the quality of work that is done. And I think the secret of this multiplication is that any of those factors is zero. The product is zero. If you have no quality, investment doesn't work. If your size is zero, the other factors have little influence. And I think that if you take a kind of bird's eye view on the Finnish-ASEAN relationship, we face the stark reality. Our size is not zero, but we have less than 1 per mil of world population. We have maybe 0.5% of the world's GDP. So if we want to increase our science and technology capability, the only factors that really count are the intensity, that is the share of R&D of GDP, plus quality. When we take Japan, which has probably the highest product of those 4 countries of all, is that, of course, Japan is number 2 economy in the world. It invests more than 3% of GDP for research and development, and it has some very good universities, a system of research institutes, RIKEN in particular, and others. What is, I think, important in the case of India and China is that the economic size is, well, still limited, but growing quickly, and the potential economic size is incredible. The degree of investment in R&D is, I think, 0.8 in China, as we learned, maybe in India, sorry, and maybe 1.3, 1.4 in China, and it's growing, as we learned. Where the challenge might be, where those countries, in particular India and China, may face a challenge, is how to assure the quality of research. If I understand correctly, I've been a little bit traveling in those countries, is that there are some very strong institutions, some of the institutes in the Chinese Academy of Science, Tsinghua University and others, in India, the Indian Institute of Science in Bangalore, some of the Indian Institute of Technology, and so on and so forth, maybe a few universities. So what is a challenge for us, to my mind, is that while the size of the economy grows, there is more investment in R&D, and the quality is improving. How we are going to face this challenge? I think simply we can't be confrontational. We don't have means in Finland to be confrontational. So what we can do are continue robust investment in public R&D, hope that the private R&D, corporate R&D stays in Finland, its key parts at least stay in Finland, and we try to invest in quality as much as we can.
Now we are moving
I have some policy recommendations as well, but
yeah.
I'll stop here, and if you give me another chance, so I'll come back to them.
I will give you another chance. But I would like to still kind of just continue on your quality perspective or dimension in your formula. Now, you specifically mentioned quality of research. Is that the only quality that is needed?
Well, sorry if I just said, when I meant research, of course I meant the whole spectrum of innovative activities, from basic research to even the product development. So I think all those different elements of science and technology need quality.
Yes, I agree, and that probably links back to what Petri was saying earlier as well. That it's the kind of the multi kind of disciplinary kind of leadership of carrying through the whole chain of innovation, which is really the quality that we are after here, not just the quality of research. But let's now kind of turn our attention to you in the audience. I'm sure you are full of kind of interesting questions and want to challenge our speakers, disagree, agree, commentaries, whatever. Please, yes, here we have second row, Ram from India.
I think the panelists make some excellent observations, but perhaps they could explore some of their observations in a little bit more detail. And my first question is, and I will defer my second question for others. My first question is to Professor Raimo. And the question is with regards to his formula. And this is not a challenge, it's an exploration. Who determines appropriate and adequate quality is my question. I'll explore it just a little bit, because when a complete segment of population is denied service, which means there is zero quality, they don't have access to products and services, what then is the benchmark that you use in your formula to determine appropriate and adequate quality? I will not want this discussion to work in segments like healthcare, where life and death situations are there, but let's look at some primary elements of survival, and perhaps you can help explore there what it means in terms of appropriate quality. Thank you.
All right, we all know that the assessment quality is different. We all know that in science, in basic research, the method is peer review. Well, Winston Churchill once said that democracy is the loudest political system in the world, but no one has invented a better one. And I think the peer review has the same problem, that it's a lousy one, but it works. Maybe in the case of companies, it's measured in the market, because low quality products hardly ever survive. But you and Dr. Ramasami, raised a very important point about the inclusive growth and access, which indeed, even in Finland, and even more so in China and India, are central factors. And perhaps, I'm not too mathematical myself, but perhaps we have another multiplication here, that even if you have, in terms of scientific quality or competitive quality, very good products, but there are no access to them, the product is again zero. So the access, availability, usability, I think are very important aspects in that determining the quality in the larger, broader sense.
Okay, other questions? Here we in the front row we have Esko Kilpi.
I have a question to all the panelists, please. Now, if we want to advance the innovation agenda, I think there may be some obstacles en route. And some of the obstacles are the language you use in the context of innovations. The language of management is very much a language of predictability, control, linearity, and planning. And as we know, innovation is about creativity. So the question is, do we need new approaches, for example, what comes to management education? And secondly, if we talk about innovation not only in the technology and science domains, but in the corporate domain, our organizational forms are perfect for repetition, but they are not geared towards change and creativity. So do we need more research on organizational forms that would support innovation and creativity? Thank you.
Thank you for excellent set of questions. Who would like to start? Dr. Ramasami, please.
See, primarily science by itself, forget about innovation, even science, talks about nonlinear processes, while management and systems give you linear processes. Very often the problems of the bureaucracy versus scientists is as a result of interfacial tension that exists between a nonlinear character of science, nonlinear character of innovation, and the linear systems required to govern a country's agenda of any kind. That is, even within one nation, within one culture, there's growth versus stability, always conflict. Innovation is about growth. The higher you grow, the less stable you are. The more stable you are, the less you grow. You can't really wish one without the other. So the very innovative method of resolving the tension at the interface is all about the nation's governance system. And majority of the countries which have prospered out of science and innovations to get into wealth generation and economic agenda really have used very good models to resolving that perpetual conflict that exists between the innovation agenda and the stability of a society. When you want to take that into an international platform, go from one culture to the larger systems, this has a third dimension, which essentially is there is a nationality in every one of us, the national spirit which wants to protect one's own social interests in the system. Therefore, only those partnerships where there's a huge asymmetry that exists between the two partners will actually work. The strength of one country is in an area of weakness of the other, and vice versa. If you bring that across, I think eventually the urge to succeed together will help us resolving this issue. It has worked in different places.
Erkki.
Yeah, I think this is an extremely important question. It relates both to the public organizations and in particular it relates to the business community. And I think we are facing a really new era in that regard. It's sort of a question of inclusiveness as well, that we can't monopolize innovation anymore. Innovation doesn't take place in the innovation office of a company. It doesn't take place in the innovation unit of the university. It takes all around us. And the question is that those who intend to benefit from innovation, they have the best capability of mobilizing innovations wherever they happen. Whether it's inside the company, whether it's outside the company, whether it's in the university, it's a science-based innovation, or it's a user-based innovation, to bring the user communities to understand the demand and the needs of the people, and the inclusiveness argument. Those are the future challenges that we are facing in all organizations.
And Petri, would you like to also
maybe just a brief commentary on the organizational innovations. I think I fully agree with you. Even the basic technological innovations really don't materialize in impact and results. Most of them actually also require an organizational change, one way or the other, be that in a corporation, be that in a social service. So even in the narrow definition of innovation, but for engineering innovations, we still need organizational innovations to make sure that the new technology really makes a difference.
Yeah. So I guess we can all kind of conclude that the answer to your question is yes, we absolutely need research and more understanding of new kind of organizational forms and ways to kind of do things in a kind of this kind of networked innovation intensive driven kind of society. So it's absolutely a must, and I think it has to be addressed more in the curriculums of universities as well. Other questions from the audience? Yes, there's here a question from Teppo Turkki.
Yeah, good afternoon, Teppo Turkki from the University of Art and Design. I would like to ask you about how do you see the role of the R&D in the future? The agenda of innovation economically is different than R&D. To create innovation, sometimes doesn't cost so much, maybe $1,000, but to put it to the market costs $10 million. And the other side, the information and knowledge, and especially new scientific knowledge, is a commodity today. So it's globally everywhere very quickly. So to create innovation is a different process than create new knowledge. So how do you see the role of the R&D in the future, let's say in 10 or 15 years? Will it still have this kind of basic role? I mean, everybody is counting how much we are putting money to the R&D. Or is this logic changing in the future? I mean, there was an estimation in England that the money that's around the innovation system, only 40% of that money goes to the R&D and 60% goes to the different processes. How do you see that?
Raima.
Well, I think the conceptions are indeed changing. Perhaps in the past we had an image that R&D is a structured, systematic process. We put resources into a system, whether companies or universities, and they produce something useful that potentially can be converted into the market. But as Esko's EU report pointed out, that R&D figures are just inputs, and they do not necessarily, guarantee any useful, high-quality product. And it may be that, as Erkki, I think, argued, that R&D is becoming a sort of more unstructured, a more decentralized process. It happens in a number of places for a number of reasons, and with quite a variety of end results. This is like basic research has been all along. When you start doing some major research, you don't know what is the end result. It happens in labs and archives and universities, but perhaps the tendency is that R&D is becoming somehow unglued, activity, and creativity, of course, comes in here. And the challenge is how to best capture the results of this somewhat unglued, decentralized process. Of course, bigger companies like Nokia are better in that because they have better resources. The question is how smaller players, and perhaps, with less resources, can sort of benefit from that more decentralized process as well.
Did you have a comment? Sure. Yes.
I would like to once again bring a diversity of the R&D structure. R&D is not one aggregated output. You can say this is R&D. There's an R&D which is passion-driven. That R&D which is purpose-directed. There's an R&D which is focused on power to lead. There's an R&D for people-centric models. Wherever it is in the early times when research was a personal pursuit, a personal undertaking of an individual, the country's investments were not relevant. The person's individual enterprise was relevant. Today, people find that research has to provide a solution to a problem, a social issue, an economic issue, provide a marketable product. So when you are looking at that part of the R&D, which is still undertaken as a personal undertaking, that will continue to get its own attention. That's because of the individual creativity that expresses itself. A painter cannot paint what the government asks him to paint. A scientist is one such. But there are now global recognitions that that kind of research for discovery is not sufficient. It has to solve problems. It has to meet a social objective. That R&D taken for an objective of a purpose for a country's cost, I'm sure there will be a public good issue. And there is a private good. And the private good component of the R&D is growing across the world. And that's the one reason why they're talking about 70% investment of R&D expenditure coming from private sector. Because they look at the market. They look at that research provides them an opportunity which otherwise they won't have. So what drives the R&D is important. But I believe it is necessary to look at the four goods: the public good, the social good, the strategic good, and of course the private good. And I believe, in my opinion, R&D will persist with the ratios differing in different contexts, but the global average is 50-50, public versus private.
Interesting. I think a good concluding remark for this part of our discussion. If I may, I would probably kind of like to summarize this first question. What I heard from you, kind of all agreeing, and it was that the importance of human talent was something that this is absolutely key here. Also, market conditions and the right public-private partnering, as you emphasized, Dr. Ramasami, and also I think we all agreed also on a fourth element, that's kind of the inclusiveness in a way in innovation. Otherwise, it cannot really be for the good of the nation, and that's something to be kept well in mind. But let's move on now with the kind of the second part of our discussion, and that's really the policy implications, which we kind of started already to discuss about, and particularly Erkki Ormala was keen on moving on to that part. So why don't you, Erkki, continue what you started with, and with the kind of some of the key policy implications to Finland and maybe Europe, starting maybe first from Finland, and if you have any reflections to Europe as a whole, then please go ahead.
Well, I want to be very brief.
Yes.
This easily gets very extensive debate. But I want to raise two things, which, in my view, crystallize very much the problem itself. The first one is that we have to understand the name of the game, which is the competition of talent. That we have to be able to attract and reward and retain the best talents in the world. This is not to say that we have to import them all into Finland. It is to say that we have to be able to partner. It is, of course, one challenge of bringing enough talented researchers, talented innovators, talented venture capitalists, and talented students to study in the Finnish universities or work in the Finnish working environment. But that would be a sort of a solution which is not sustainable. We have to learn to partner. And there I see huge opportunities. We are very much integrated into the European collaboration. But we are not at all, to that extent, integrated into the Asian R&D, venture capital, and other developments there. We as a company, we cannot afford of being absent. We have strong R&D in China. We have very strong R&D in Japan. We are building our capabilities and linkages in India. So this is a matter of life and death for companies. And I believe that this is equally important for countries. So understand that innovation rests on excellence. And that is extremely important question. So how do we create an environment which makes us attractive partner, which makes Finland an attractive place for top talents? May they be students, may they be researchers, may they be venture capitalists. And I think that this is a pretty tough challenge for the Finnish society if we look at the conditions which prevail today.
Do you have something particular in mind when you talk about the conditions?
We can discuss about the possible solutions. I just wanted to raise this challenge.
Okay. Erkki, would you like to, sorry, Petri, would you like to kind of provide a solution?
Not a full one, at least. As I said, I think up till now Finland has succeeded basically on rather high and even averages in science or education, rather than being excellent, globally speaking. And I think that has been a clear advantage in a small country. I think we have been pretty good, be that science or education, in most of the relevant sectors. But I think that is now, the picture is changing. I think we are facing a double challenge. I think we still need to maintain the reasonable averages in science and in education in most of the sectors, but on top of that we need to excel even globally on few selected areas where we can really make the global difference, visibility that catches the attention of the others in this totally open innovation environment that we have. I mean, there are no borders that limit the flow of scientists or scientific information, so there has to be something that really attracts the top talent to Finland, or at least attracts them to cooperation with us. So that's basically the point number one that we have to take into account better in the policy making, and I'm sure at least our Finnish colleagues know that there are already quite some activities underway really to strengthen the strategic choices of science, technology, and innovation. I don't want to repeat those here, but we're talking about these shock centers and many others, FIDIPO programs, to name a few initiatives. I think something that is specifically characteristic for Finland as well is that innovation is not only a corporate issue. It's not only there to support the competitiveness of enterprises. At least in Finland, if one looks at the economy, for example, is it 47% or something like that of the GDP actually comes from the public sector. So the efficiency, productivity, quality in the public activities is important for the economy to prosper. And I think this extended notion of innovation through not only scientific and technological innovations to the public side of the economy, I think is something where there's a lot to be done and to be gained, be that in health care, increasing quality and health results, be that in education or many other sectors. And again, that is something that is already being taken up on the agenda and the drawing board of the Finnish science and technology policies. And probably the last element that I would say should and could drive the policy making is that though we are small, like Mikko said, and referring to Richard Florida and Pekka Himanen, that world is not flat. We're not competing amongst nations. We are basically competing, or it's a beauty contest between spikes. And Finland, in a global innovation economy, is a spike. And we could be, and the challenge is how do we make our spike at least as shiny as is the Kansai area in Japan or the Shanghai region in China or Bangalore. So I think there we can still make a difference.
And Raimo.
Yes, if I may continue from this primary school mathematics from the multiplication game. I think the simple conclusion from that is that countries with bigger size and more capabilities, they can afford to invest in science and technology across the board, in several fields, perhaps even all relevant fields. And in that sense, the absolute size matters. In a smaller country with limited resources, one has to be more selective. One has to specialize, try to find out the fields where the spikes are shiny, as Petri said. But this is a difficult task, because you always, in every society, you also make bad investment decisions. And then you have the dilemma of how you can choose the right objects of investment. I mean, in the public sphere, maybe in the private sphere as well. And indeed, as Petri I think rightly has been pointing out, it's not a so-called beauty contest between nations. It's really are the actors, universities, laboratories, and so on and so forth, that compete with each other. And I think the only solution, and there has been some criticism in Finland, but the only solution really is to invest in sectors where we believe we can make a difference and produce as high quality and competitive research work. It doesn't need to be only in engineering. It could be philosophy and other fields as well. Let's not forget humanities and social sciences in this discussion.
And I think they link well to this kind of broader kind of a concept of social innovation, or kind of which really includes all elements, also the changing behavior of people in front of new services, or to be able to kind of use new services, etc.
Can I just add
yes.
one sentence? Because talking about specialization, I think it's not enough to say that we have to specialize in nano. Well, nano is only a metric. It's a huge field. We have concentrated efforts in Finland by TECHES, by the Academy, by the Ministry of Education. Yet, what we can spend on nano is a fraction of what, say, Japan and the United States are spending. So even within these catchwords are not necessarily very helpful, nano, bio, and so on and so forth. You have to find the important areas within those broader areas, catchwords.
Let me turn back to our kind of guests from India and China. How does this sound to you, and particularly when talking about broader innovations like beyond companies? Now I'm talking about, for instance, healthcare system, or that like just an example. Would India and China be interested in discussing with somebody like Finland about kind of a collaboration in areas like healthcare, and importing and utilizing some of those kind of innovative ways of doing things and technologies and applications in your own kind of environment? Is that something that you are after?
Well, I think China is, as long as you don't talk about political reforms, and China is pretty much open to any discussions in terms of economy or science advancement. I think in the context, the Chinese context of innovation is actually changing. It tried to change the current sort of reform and innovation is sort of used very frequently by the Chinese. Even there's a government branch, it's called the sort of reform and development. So in that context, I think that it's the market, basically, if you're looking at China as a market, is quite open. Collaborations, research is welcome, and joint ventures. And I think the environment is right for lots of companies. I think the U.S. companies have established many research institutes in China, and they suck in the local talents. But I think the government or the people do not care, because they actually learn a lot from the investors, from sort of people from foreign countries, and also China. On the other hand, China is sending people outside China. And every year there's 100,000 students, and they actually very serious. They go out, they want to get a degree, and they want to bring something back if possible. I think China is pretty much open, and except the don't touch the political reform part, because the government is worried about that, because it's a fast-growing economy. There are many other things to worry about. And not to shake the sort of the political structure. It itself suffered a lot during the Cultural Revolution in the past, and people are just tired of talking about politics.
Okay. What about India?
Well, China has Himalayas in the south, and we have the Himalayas in the north. So our approaches are, in that sense, in matrix inversed. We talk about political freedom, we talk about economic freedom. Our economic freedom is a fairly planned and regulated process. Because when you go from a planned economy to a market economy, there are different challenges that come with it. You get a competition, heat sets in, then you have a competition shakeout. You go through processes. Finally, you get to dynamic competition. A country which had relied on internal resources of technology, sources, all along until 1991, has a huge infrastructure to serve its needs. When you talk about quality of our S&T, India has a space research program, could give you imageries at costs which are difficult to match. That was achieved at levels of investment 1/10 of what others could have done. Therefore, our necessity to protect that infrastructure is a challenge by itself. Therefore, as we release this economic freedom, enter this economic freedom, which is our high priority model, we open up sectors for these collaborations where that partnership will gain for both. Will be a gain for both, and there is no subsystem of the country which will be unduly threatened, and there'll be a checkout which leads to a social catastrophe. Given this dimension, India has always been open to any suggestion. That's even a religion is inclusive. Therefore, it is extremely possible to look at areas where the size advantage of the country and a system advantage of partners like you, the system integrated advantage of partners like you, bring value for both.
Thank you very much. I think that's an interesting kind of opportunity to kind of explore more. Going back to Petri Peltonen's point that we need to look at the innovation also beyond corporate world, and what we can together, for instance, in Finland, what we need to anyway kind of renew. If the systemic kind of changes that we do here are kind of sufficient or good, provide a good starting point for doing something together with for instance, India, etc., is an interesting kind of opportunity to explore more.
Basically, our kind of policy structures have to address the two questions. What is good for innovation? So design a policy, what is good for innovation? But as a country, we have something more. For what good innovation for? What innovation good for? Is very important. So that designing the policy structure has to be based on such balance of both parts.
Thank you. Did you, Erkki, still have something to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to elaborate the thing that it's indeed the approach that you just described. It's a question of knowledge sharing. That is the essence of the whole thing, that we can learn together. And in order to create an environment where we can learn together, we need trust. And that is exactly the way forward. But to give us sort of, make the whole thing very practical, I just wanted to give you one example. We have invested in Tsinghua University. We have a joint faculty in Tsinghua University. And if we think the challenge to Finland, the Tsinghua School of Computer and Information Sciences is the leading institution in China. It's been selected the China leading institution, which has been properly resourced. There are 5,000 students. 3,000 are taking their bachelor degree, 2,000 that are working for masters, and 1,000 are doctoral students. There are a bit more than 700 senior staff faculty, which means a ratio between teacher and student 1:7, which is the same as in Stanford, which is the same as at MIT. So in Tsinghua, Stanford and MIT, we have a competitive environment where the research and education can proceed hand in hand. So my practical challenge to the Finnish society, please create institution on those areas which we think strategically important, where we have competitive environment that is now being delivered by Tsinghua, Stanford and MIT. I know that this is a very, very big challenge for the Finnish society. There is a lot of debate, if you read press, about the innovation university or about how to increase the basic funding for universities, how to improve the quality and how to develop the knowledge centers or the concentrations of knowledge in Finland. These are all, let's say, responses to this kind of challenge. But how do we achieve this? This is going to be the test. This is what we are looking in industry. Because we don't believe that the quality will be on the sustainable level and on the sustainable path if we can't reach these kind of simple metrics and qualifications.
Thank you, Erkki, for very, very concrete, practical kind of proposals for us to consider. Now we have Esko.
I do have actually two short comments. For the first, what Erkki, you said about the challenge in the let's say, in the high end of innovation, then there is another end, the role of the consumers. And I think it's very important to keep in mind that without consumer demand, qualified consumer demand, you are not able to create and take into the use the most modern technologies and to make new applications. And both ends have to be very strong in a small country, and that is a major challenge for us. But then there is one element which has been touched in this discussion, and somebody told about internationalization and globalization. I think it's a major difference between multinational company and global company. It was 1985 when Nokia established first unit in China with 4 persons. 20 years later, Nokia had several thousands of people working in China in a very, very different way. And I'm quite confident that what business communities are doing then now, all other communities are going to do in the future. Even public sector actors have to be able to not only to collaborate with foreign actors, but to be able to create networks and to operate together with foreign actors. My guess is that, for example, the Finnish healthcare sector is going to be dependent on Indian services in the future. We cannot survive without that kind of structure, which means that we have to have this cultural element strongly involved in innovation system. We have to be able to operate with different cultures simultaneously. Now a question to our foreign guests and experts. How do you see your own countries and challenges in your own countries? Do you feel that you are able to meet that challenge in China and India, to be able to operate in that kind of global arena? Or is it so that you are expecting that global companies are coming to China and India and starting to operate there?
Okay, I think I have...
He comes before I...
That's right, yeah. I think it's a good question. I think China, if you look back the Chinese culture, the Chinese people I've mentioned many times are not very religious. They're very open. And the Chinese people are not very invasive. They think China is the center of the world, and they want to build their home to be sort of perfect. And I think they're facing, Chinese people are facing the challenges, and they talk about it, and they recognize the challenges. They take criticism pretty well, actually. If you watch TV in China, that every day they talk about these global issues all the time, and all the way down to the farmers even. If you take a taxi in Beijing, the taxi driver would discuss politics with you. And it's very common in China. And I think it's the reason China has been growing so fast, economically or scientifically, is because the willingness of the people. I think it's a good environment for foreign companies to invest. And there's like Microsoft established a research institute there. Now Nautilus has one almost 10 years there in Beijing with the 100 or so staff and researchers. And recently, Syngenta is establishing a research institute in China. And these are certainly a drainage for local talents, as I mentioned before. But the government and the people take that very well. And I think they will meet the challenge in every aspect: energy, environment, healthcare reform, and education reform. I think I have the positive feeling about the people, especially, and the government is trying to facilitate that. It's just very careful about the political reforms, as I emphasized quite a few times.
And brief answer from here.
As far as the Indian situation is concerned, for innovations, India is very open, and they would like to, as a country and a society, engage into fruitful partnerships on a global platform.
Thank you very much for your answers. Our distinguished special guest star from stars from India and China, and also from our special guest star from Finland. It's time to start kind of wrapping up today's seminar, unless you have some burning questions in your mind that you just want to present briefly, Ram.
One question. I want to amplify Esko's point about the demand side of this discussion.
Yeah.
Yes, I just want anybody on the panel can comment, but I think Esko touches on something really significant. There are two sides to this. There is a demand side. And from a policy intervention perspective, is there something that can be done to amplify the weak signals of massive demand, which otherwise go unnoticed, which is another way of saying inclusive?
Yeah.
And that's a very significant part.
No, absolutely. Let's not kind of open the discussion for that point, but let's kind of keep in mind that now when going forward, because the inclusiveness and the demand side are kind of go hand to hand, and they really are at the center and core of innovative activities. I don't think the speakers explicitly took them up today that clearly, but it was in their thinking as I understood. But thank you very much, Esko and Ram, to remind us from that.